Hi, I'm Robert Vendetti, professional comic book writer, and I want you to know about the new Bad Idea comic book series, Tankers. As the world well knows, I'm what's called a method writer. That means before I begin a project, I don't just study the material, So to take a deep dive into the subject, I came to the one place on Earth where I can operate mechanized combat equipment, dig for oil, and shoot dinosaurs. Texas tea, baby! I'm down to the tank! No oil yet? Every second of my immersive research experience guarantees that Tankers is unlike anything you've read from me before. I should know. I've read everything I've ever written. Tankers is about a crack team of mercenaries and mech suits who work for Greenleaf Oil. They get sent back in time to divert the comet to kill the dinosaurs. More dinosaurs in the past means more oil in the present. Who doesn't love that? And with a superstar art team providing breathtaking covers and interiors, Tankers is an action-fueled thrill ride of human versus dinosaur warfare that we can't wait for you to read. So go ahead, order Tankers today. I guarantee I'll be glad you did. As for me, I'll be finishing off these dinosaurs. Extinction Day! Extinction Day.
There's a town that lies nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains in the great American state of Pennsylvania. The name of the town is White Ash. With a town charter dating back to 1714, it's one of the oldest towns in the country. And as you can tell from how hard those smokestacks are puffing, it's also one of the coldest. Thankfully, the people of White Ash have a secret that's dark and very deep. A secret to keeping warm, bituminous coal. From bituminous coal as a product ingredient comes heat, power, transportation, and necessities and luxuries almost beyond count. And where, you might ask, does all that coal come from? The answer is places like Alden Mountain and towns just like White Ash, where it's dug from the mountains by the hardest working men in America, our coal miners. But while an industry supports the town supports the industry. Here are two of White Ash's finest young entrepreneurs, Catlin and Kyle, owners of the Double K gas station. Coming or going, they'll get you there. But a town can't be all work and no play. Hello, Alec. Hello, Lillian. Where are you two kids going? Why, they're going to Sif's. Don't let its Nordic theme fool you. The most popular place in every American town is the local diner, and Sif's is no exception. Home to the world-famous Stack Attack, Sif's have been filling the bellies of White Ashians since 1895. Yes, White Ash, founded by men who came from the four corners of the earth, bringing with them innovation, can-do spirit, and dark, dark secrets.
What's up, everybody? It's Kyle. Welcome into the Legends Lounge. Tonight in the Legends Lounge, we find a person who is a legend you probably haven't heard of, but you will soon because he's got a book out this week and he knows more about a certain famous person that you're definitely interested in than maybe anybody other than that famous person. And we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Danny Fingeroth.
Hello, Kyle. Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Thank you for being here. So tell everyone, first of all, how you got into comics.
You mean professionally, or when I started reading them as a kid?
Yes.
Okay. I started reading them as a kid. I'm one of the dreaded baby boom generation, so that means I was reading them in the very late 50s and early 60s, which means I was right there when the whole Marvel thing happened. I was, I think my first Marvel comic was Fantastic Four #4, Volume 1. And to be like 8, 9, 10 years old when that stuff was coming out, it was a very magical thing. It was more than just something you were reading to pass the time. It was a way of life, the way Stan built up this relationship, outside these great stories by Stan and Steve and Jack and Larry and Johnny and Don and and Marie and the others. It was this thing that brought you into a special clubhouse that seemed like you were being talked to individually, even though there were hundreds of thousands of millions of people also reading the comic. So that was my, before that, I've been reading the DC comics, of course, because that's mainly what there was. And the Marvel stuff was a game changer. Professionally, I started. I'd gotten a very interesting liberal arts degree at Binghamton University in upstate New York, and wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I liked comics. Especially, I've been getting into the Jim Warren era of the Spirit and Harvey Picar's American Splendor. So I wasn't so much following the Marvel DC line, but I was from New York. And through various circumstances, I had a chance to take an entry-level job at Marvel, working as the assistant to Larry Lieber, Stan Lee's brother. And Larry was running this division called the British Department. So that was my my entry into the professional world of comics.
What was at the British Department when you started there? What was in the British Department?
British Department was mostly reprint titles. We're talking 1977. So don't believe everything you read in Wikipedia. Wikipedia makes me older than I am, which is that I'm old. As old as I am is bad enough, but Wikipedia adds a few years because Larry had been running Seaboard Comics for Martin Goodman, and because I started as Larry's assistant, Wikipedia mixes those factoids together. The British market at that point consisted of at least the British kids market was weekly black and white comics like 2000 AD and Beano, and it would be 3, 4, 5 page stories. You'd have a half a dozen of them in an issue, and they were in black and white. So believe it or not, Marvel was repackaging a lot of our comics into 3, 4, 5 page chapters with new splash pages in black and white with Zipatone, and shipping them to England to be printed. We did some new covers, new splash pages, and we did new Captain Britain stories. And Captain Britain, as the world demanded, was being done by guys from Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, because who else would understand British stories? Although Chris Claremont, who was one of the creators of the character, was a part British and had, I think, grown up some in England. Anyway, so so we would do stuff like change the spelling of color to color, elevator to lift. Now, of course, the real hardcore fans who wanted the actual comics, they were getting the color comics by hook or by crook from America. But just for the average, kid reader, this was the market. My co-worker, my compatriot, who was the assistant editor in the office in England, in London, was a guy named Neil Tennant, who went on to become one of the Pet Shop Boys. So that was that's what we were doing, and that was the British Marvel with a new bullpen bulletin page as well. And we did a lot of Star Wars. That was around when Star Wars, which came out first as a Marvel comic before it was the movie. There was such great demand in England for Star Wars that we were printing it at twice the rate. We were in effect doing 2 monthly issues that came out in Star Wars Weekly in England. So I became, because of that, the assistant editor on that title, working with Archie Goodwin.
So was it all like the Spider-Man Weekly, the Star Wars Weekly? Was that kind of so one of the things about me is I'm fascinated by the Euro prints from that era, because, well, I'm a completionist and I gotta have them, especially for the Spider-Man titles.
Right.
So, like, I've been buying UK releases of these books for years and years. So I'm absolutely fascinated by that time frame.
So what was the question?
So was it all just the kind of the Spider-Man weeklies and the Star Wars weeklies, the weeklies, or were they just straight up repackages with some minor text editing, I guess?
Well, I mean, it was both. I mean, it was minor text editing, and it was repackaged for that weekly market. As I said, I think there was definitely a market, for that weekly black and white market. I think the people who were, really wanted the genuine article found some way to get the American comics.
Sure.
Shipped over there. But the idea is, if you're going to go on a newsstand and compete with Beano in 2000 AD and whatever other homegrown material, then Marvel seemed to think that was the format. I never really fully understood. I mean, Marvel has always and still does license comics all over the world and in a million different languages. I was never quite sure why we took, so much attention to England, that we had an office in America, that we did these comics specific, as opposed to saying to a licensee or licensor, whichever it is, as opposed to saying to the people who are printing them, here's a bunch of photostats of our comics, do with them what you will and send us a check. Somehow with the English stuff, we took a lot more interest in. I sometimes think it's just because Stan's wife was British, but I don't know if that's really the reason.
Do you follow any of the offshore prints that are coming out now?
I do not. Anything specific you had?
Well, there's emerging markets in places like Turkey and former Soviet bloc countries where they're just now getting like ASM 129. And like newsstand editions of that are selling on the secondary market for hundreds of dollars.
Now, why is that? What makes them so valuable?
Because they've never been there before. And it's, or they've never been there legally before. And so it's people are just clamoring for the books and they just can't get them there fast enough.
Oh, that's really
in those native languages.
Right. So they're translated. Yeah, no, that's interesting. So countries where, it's, I mean, just sort of, tangentially, which I have a feeling we'll get into a lot of tangents during this conversation. But there is a Spanish academic whose name I'm blanking on, but he wrote an article about how in the 50s and 60s and 70s in Franco Spain, in fascist Franco Spain, Superman, just these Superman comics that we in America thought were so bland and white bread and, and kind of middle of the road, were considered kind of radical and revolutionary and forbidden, which made them all that more attractive.
Yeah. I think that has a lot to do with it there.
Louis Valencia, that's the name of the guy. Or
Louis Valencia.
Yeah,
I mean, and it's Spider-Man. Spider-Man, for instance, has a long history of being published in other languages. I mean, I've got a whole box here of El Hombre Arana, So, but you started off as an editor, and then you moved into writing.
Well, I started as I started as an assistant editor. Which I've always been a writer since I was a little kid. I've always been, and of course, I had aspirations to be Jack Kirby. Because if you're a kid who likes comics, that's obviously the first thing you're attracted to is the art. You go, "Ooh, I wish I could draw like those people." So I started at Marvel as an assistant editor, and then just sort of by being there are opportunities for writing arose, even if it's just the ad copy or writing new recap splash pages or cover copy. And then, because I did want to write comics, anytime an opportunity arose to do that, I took it. So I did some couple of, I think the first things were a couple of Avengers inventories, which I co-wrote. Not inventories, issues of the issues of the Avengers that I co-wrote, and then I guess some fill-in stuff. But eventually that led to me writing the Dazzler. But while I had gone, the British department became actually fully British in about a year and a half after I started there. A publisher and editor named Des Skin, who was from England, convinced Marvel that perhaps actual English people should be in charge of putting out the English books. So the operation went fully over there, except for Star Wars, which I was still involved with. And then I became part of the editorial mix of the mainstream editorial, sort of the general utility player, working with Jim Shooter and Sal Brodsky, doing a wide variety of projects, including reprints, and then I became a Louise Jones, so you may know her as Louise Simonson's assistant, when she came over from Warren to do to edit the X-Men and Conan and Star Trek and Star Wars comics. And but all that time I've been doing whatever fill-in writing I could find. And then through a variety of circumstances, I'd been editing and then found myself writing the Dazzler.
So is the life of a fill-in writer different than in terms of the work life, different than the work life of somebody who's just on a project all the time?
Well, sure. I mean, the life of a fill-in writer, I don't know if you would call that if that's a distinct job description.
I don't think it is, but I guess what I'm asking is how does, as opposed to someone like, I don't know, Chris Claremont being like, he's the X-Men guy.
Right.
He'll be over there on X-Men. When you're a fill-in, is it like, hey, these are the things we need written? Who wants to take a pass? How does that work?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, Marvel historically, probably from the day the doors opened in the 1939, has had a problem getting their books to the printers on time. It's just human nature. Either people procrastinate, or they're perfectionists, or they're stretched thin. So I mean that's, and again, this is something when you think back on the history, they've always done, even in the Marvel '60s days. Anyway, if you figure that it's inevitable that somebody's going to miss a deadline, be it the writer, artist, colorist, whoever, you don't want to miss one of the 12 monthly slots on the newsstand. You don't want to pay for time at the printers that with nothing running on the press. So companies accumulate what are called inventory stories that can fit almost anywhere in the continuity. And certainly if you slap on like at the last minute, a page, the beginning and end to say this happened. We know you were here hoping, well, look, the classic is, I guess, Jim Steranko was doing Captain America in the '60s, and they were in danger of missing an issue, so they went to Jack Kirby, who put together a whole issue over a weekend. I think that became a classic on its own. So yes, so the assignment is always take a character or a couple of characters. To say, if you have a story that's got Spider-Man and the Thing and the Beast, well, then it can be in an issue of X-Men and an issue of Marvel 2-in-1. It can be an issue of something that
Amazing Adventures.
Amazing Adventures, exactly. So do a story with one or two or three characters that is as time, as continuity proof as you can get it. So don't mess with anything in the continuity or with the supporting cast. But so the idea is, if somebody misses a deadline, then this can get slotted in, and of course you want it to be as good as possible, so people will still come back the next month.
Well, and I suppose you just answered my next question, which was going to be, did you ever feel tempted to take a big swing when you were doing some of that with you know what, I'm going to kill somebody. I'm going to kill a character, or I'm going to create a character that's going to be so great they're going to be around forever. Did you ever feel the temptation to take a big swing?
Well, what yes, not in. I'll tell you, I kind of adopted two characters that I used a lot and sort of developed their continuity. One was Old Man Dominic Fortune, who was a Howard Chaykin character, and then J.M. DeMatteis had brought him back as an old man, and since I'm on the road to old Jewish mandom myself, I liked, although back then I was less far along that road, but I liked the idea of an old Jewish man superhero. So I did a lot of stories with Dominic Fortune, and there have been talk of for a while me doing a miniseries that didn't happen with the Julia Carpenter Spider Woman. So I used her a lot because I did a whole bunch of Iron Man inventory story. Iron Man was the main one, but there were, did some Avengers annuals, various, various one shots. So I kind of didn't do it. The one thing I did, I did do, is I did an Iron Man story, and I looked at the Iron Man supporting cast, and I saw there was a woman named Jocasta's the android, a woman with a name something like, an ancient Greek name or a classical literature name. And she was the sister of some other character. And I made her instrumental in a story because I figured nobody is ever going to do anything with this character. Well, needless to say, it turned out David Michelini and Bob Layton and what name was Mark Bright drawing it then. But they had in mind a major storyline with this character, so it entailed a lot of last minute rewriting on mine to make it fit into that continuity.
So we've been talking. Good.
Fill-ins or inventories. I mean, there are ways for people to break in. There are ways for people who, are in need of more work to do work. But I mean, you definitely would see inventories by top people as well. I'm sure if you go I mean, I think certainly people who regular writers on a series would rather have had their own credit, even on an inventory story. So a wide variety of people did them and do them.
So we've been talking about Marvel, and one of the things that I know you for is that you perhaps may be the most knowledgeable person about one of the cornerstones of our industry in terms of Stan Lee. In fact, you wrote a book about him. Tell us about
My God, I
The
forgot.
Marvelous Life.
Okay. I had a,
This is me trying to be a good host and not just marking out over everyone.
I will subtly get. This is the book, A Marvelous Life: The Amazing Story of Stan Lee. There. Yeah, it was contrary to what others may have claimed, it was the first biography of Stan to come out after his death, and it was unauthorized, but I still did 2 lengthy interviews with him, and he did not deny me access to anybody who I wanted to speak to. So it's a it takes I think a generally positive view of Stan, but I don't think it's a hagiography. I think most reviewers, there are exceptions, of course, but most people seem to think I did a fairly well balanced job of presenting his achievements and the things he did that weren't so wonderful. But it's
right. I think anybody who is aware of the history of comics knows that Stan Lee, for all the wonderful, wonderful things he did, also had to make some tough decisions that wound up being not such great things. And so to gloss over those would be doing a disservice to the story, correct?
Exactly. And you can't gloss over them. I think because there's a lot of reasons, but also to overemphasize them, I think is not right, either, as you sometimes see. I think it's a combination of issues. I think many people start reading comics, especially superhero comics, when they're kids. And so you have these comics that present these black, even Marvel, which has shades of gray. They're still essentially good versus evil. There's good guys who are all good. There's bad guys who are all bad. And so the temptation is to view the people who made the stories, to hold them to that same standard. Are they all good? Are they all bad? Were they selfless? Were they as idealistic as the cat? So I think there's a lot of emotion involved when people talk about people like Stan. I mean, there's one, and again, especially because so much of what led to his and Marvel's success was Stan creating this impression that he was your pal. That every time you went and read a bullpen bulletin or an answer to a letters page, and especially the stories, it wasn't some corporate homogenized entity speaking to you. It was your friend Stan Lee telling you a story about the great times he had making stories with his pals, Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and Larry Lieber and Dick Ayers. So the idea that you're introduced to something like that as a kid or as a teenager, and then suddenly you realize, oh, okay, here's a guy who survived and thrived for 75 years in publishing and entertainment, which are 2 of the most cutthroat industries in the world. He probably did some things that weren't so great, but I mean, so, I'd say overall he did his accomplishments, he accomplished a lot. He did a lot of great stuff. Was there some collateral damage along the way? Yeah, definitely. I try to not, in the book, I try to not put my thumb on the scale in the sense that I say, here's what happened, here's what he did, here's what he didn't do. you decide, whether it was right, wrong, or some gray area.
That was one of the things about your book, as opposed to some of the others that have been written about Stan that I thought was great, is that you didn't sort of politicize, or I don't know if that's the right word for it, but other people seem to have an agenda about telling parts of the story, and you're just like, no, this is what happened. I'm not going to put any of my own experiences, any of my own shading into it. Just here's what happened. And I felt like from some other people, there was some of that. So was that I mean, you mentioned it was a cognizant decision, but how hard was it not to, kind of inject your own feelings into stuff?
I'm in there in the sense when, I'm in the book, especially when there were events that I was part of or witness to.
Sure.
And I do kind of evaluate, give my own feelings about Stan at the end. But what you say holds true for most of the book. It was very challenging to try to just give those facts, especially because I've written a number of other books, and in those books and in this one, what I bring to the table, among other things, is sort of that insider's point of view. I know how the sausages are made, and I've been an editor and writer at Marvel Comics, so not that I had Stan's position, but I have some understanding of the kind of decisions and conflicts that someone who does that would have to deal with. Which again is what I think I bring to a biography like this that even the best journalist or historian couldn't. So it was. It was challenging, and I never knew. If you read the book, you'll see some places I just where there are events that I was part of, I say I or me, but there are other places I go to the more formal. This author, this author was there for that meeting between Stan Lee and Steve Ditko or something like that.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it was more impartial than maybe some others, but also more informed than some others. So there's a lot working for it. And I will say this, the way I consumed it was to have you read it to me through the form of the audiobook. And I always think audiobooks read by the author are better than audiobooks read by a schmuck. And when I say that, I mean any schmuck can read an audiobook, but when the author tells it, they can put their own emphasis on the things that in their head when they were writing it, they put emphasis on, and they can use their own inflection to, imply and make you feel certain things that they were thinking and feeling when they were writing it or when they were experiencing it. So I always think that adds a level of storytelling because it's, oh, okay, I get the nuance of conversation out of it. Go ahead.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I worked hard on that, and the people, the people who produced and directed and edited the audio version, my hat's off to them. They did an incredible job. But there's nothing like reading your own book out loud to make you two things. One, to make you realize what mistakes or omissions when you went, oh man, I can't believe I left that out. And then the other thing you learn when you read your own audiobook is how many words that you may read or even write every day that you don't actually know how to pronounce correctly. It's really
I could see it.
Yeah.
It's why I never write copy for when I do things like this. I don't write my questions down. I just kind of have them in my head.
Right.
And it's because if I try to read those questions, I will mess up simple words like the and an. But what made you decide to write the book on Stan Lee?
Well, I mean, it's funny. It just sort of, there was a point I wanted to bring up before in response to one of your questions. So it's, although I knew Stan for years and had worked with him on numerous projects, both at Marvel and at other companies that he and I worked at, not, we worked for different companies, but because I was the guy who knew Stan, I often would work with him when I worked at Byron Price, when I worked at a company called Visionary Media, which were both online entertainment companies. So I knew him, but I didn't know him, and of course I knew the broad strokes of the conflicts. So I mean, I think, my book is called A Marvelous Life: The Amazing Story of Stan Lee. And so I think that's why some people may go into it thinking of it as a hagiography, because it's got that kind of peppy, sort of chirpy title. I mean, but whereas I could have, I guess, given it a more melodramatic title, found a way to put the word conspiracy in the title or something, just to sell, So I learned a lot about Stan. I learned a lot of details about things that I only, had a more surface knowledge of. So the reason, a lot of my work in the past 20 years has been to sort of pay homage to and to explore my fascination with the people who founded the business.
Sure.
As a native New Yorker myself, as somebody with a Eastern European Jewish background like Stan had, and a lot of the early creators had, I sort of found them their lives as almost alternate history of my own aunts, uncles, cousins, parents. It was so I've always been fascinated. I work as a consultant, and I run something called Will Eisner Week for the Will and Ann Eisner Foundation and Will Eisner Studios, and that all stems from my wanting to explore the history and honor those founders. Plus, so that was part of it. Plus, I wanted to write a book that people would actually, that people outside of a small core of fans and academics and historians would buy. And I thought, well, who's the most well-known figure in comics? And there's Stan Lee, and then I don't know who's number two. So, and I happened to actually know Stan. So all those things contributed. Because I've done a number of other books, and they were very well reviewed, and people passionately love them. Some people passionately hate them, but I've written books, and I did a magazine for Tomorrow's called Right Now Magazine, and it's all stuff that any convention I go to, people come up to me and thank me. I wrote my master's thesis based on this book, and this taught me all I needed to know about being a professional comics writer. And it's great to hear. But the other thing is nice to hear is, here's a big check for this thing you just wrote. So, so I mean, it seemed like Stan, both for reasons sentimental and personal and practical, seemed like a likely person to write a book about.
Well, I wanted to ask you about one of your other books, and it's one I haven't read, only because I don't know if you know this, but it's selling for hundreds and hundreds of dollars on Amazon, which is Disguised as Clark Kent. My own personal background leads me to one, I'm hugely connected to Siegel and Schuster and the Cleveland, Ohio area, and the foundation to bring Superman back to Cleveland, as it were. And two, as a person of incredibly mixed descent, I recently discovered that I'm, similarly of Eastern European Jewish descent in some small portion, many generations back. But it makes me want to discover more. It's one of those Ancestry.com, and now you're going down a rabbit hole of, well, what was this person's life like, kind of thing.
Right.
And so I wanted to talk about that book just for a second. What made you decide you wanted to tackle Superman and comics from that sort of direction?
I think it comes down to to a matter of the personal and the practical. I had done Superman on the Couch for Continuum Publishing, which is now part of or transformed into Bloomsbury, and that did well. That actually. It's one of the books I get complimented on all the time. It went through like 5 printings, and again, given my background, my interests, and what there seemed to be a market for, my editor at Bloomsbury, a guy named Evander Lamke, said, pitch me, some ideas for new books, and one of them was this book about the Jewish backgrounds of the comics creators. So that became Disguised as Clark Kent, Jews, Comics, and the Creation of the Superhero. And unfortunately, I think it's actually a better book in a lot of ways than Superman on the Couch, because I had now written books. I'd written other books. This is the first serious but entertaining series of books. But unfortunately, the editor, through no fault of his own, but through real world economic considerations, parted ways with the publisher. Suddenly, this book came out, and there was nobody to champion it, so it sort of got lost. And the rights to both Superman on the Couch and Disguised as Clark Kent have reverted to me, and I'm looking to publish them. Again, if anybody has any suggestions for ways to do that. But so that was why I tackled that. And I'm really glad I did, because it gave me an excuse. I'd worked in comics, since I'm in my 20s, and I've been a fan since I was a child. But there's a certain level, where maybe I was too shy or too stupid, or where I'd never really pumped these older guys for information or history. I just sort of figured, well, I'm a professional, and it'll be unprofessional for me to geek out on them. Plus, if you're a Marvel editor and you're calling like a working freelancer who may happen to have been there in the 30s and 40s, and you're not offering him work, what are you wasting his time for? Oh, I wanted to know about the past. Yeah. I want to know about the present. You got any work for me?
Right. I want to know about a check at the end of the week.
Exactly. So for whatever so writing that book especially gave me a chance to get to meet and know a lot of old timers. That and modern medical science too, because a lot of these guys were alive and thriving and working. So I got to meet and be friends with Jerry Robinson and Al Jaffe and Erwin Hazen and Jules Pfeiffer. So I mean, it was so that book was, which led to me doing a lot of other things I did in subsequent years, events and panels and so on with those people. So it was, it seemed, like I said, I had an editor who wanted that book and was willing to pay me. I still have a landline. It was an editor who was willing to pay me for that book and the topic I was interested in. So I don't remember if I answered your most recent question, because I was
yes, absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely. But speaking of events and Al Jaffe, that's what we call in the biz coincidence. You're doing something with Comixplex, an editing workshop, and I noticed that Al is also doing a workshop with them.
No, that's okay. I think you're
not Al. It's about Al. Celebration of Al.
You're getting a couple of things mixed up, which I appreciate. So I will clarify. Al.
Yes, absolutely.
Al turned 100 on March 13th. Yes. And so I put together a group of people and did an event on Comixplex, which is a new comics fan and professional website, comixplex.com. So I put together an all-star crew. Again, not that not that I'm such a genius, because there's probably 100 different people I could have put together and said it's an all-star crew, but I got mad art director Sam Viviano and Spy vs. Spies Peter Cooper. I got Will Elder's daughter and son-in-law, J.J. Settlemeyer of Beavis and Butthead fame, Ari Kaplan, who is a terrific writer and also wrote a book about Jews in comics. I know I'm leaving out, Charlie Kochman of Abrams Books. If I've left anybody out, forgive me. But I put together this incredible panel, and even got Al's granddaughter to do a short video of him saying hello to everybody. So that's still up on Comixplex. You can find it. And it was this incredible 100th birthday tribute to Al, who finally, about a year and a half ago, retired from doing, from drawing for Mad. But he's still in very good shape, and did this lovely kind of greeting to his fans. Also on Comixplex, where they have J.M. DeMattis teaches a series of comics writing workshops. I'm going to be teaching starting April 24th, a 4-session, 10-hour, limited seating, live online, interactive comics editing workshop. So it's 2.5 hours on the 24th, 2.5 hours on the 24th and 25th, and then again the following weekend. I think that's the first weekend in May. So it's all the secrets I know, stuff that I'm writing down. I'm trying to figure out. Editing is one of those things that's mysterious and yet simple, and it's weird and normal, and it's a strange combination of skills. No two people do it the same. And even as I jot down notes, when I get to point, here's bullet point 235, so, what I want to do is pass forward this weird set of knowledge I have, and I'm trying to tailor it so it's for someone who might be working or aspire to be working at a Marvel or DC, or somebody who's doing a creator-owned thing, or just editing for a friend, or something on Kickstarter. So I'm trying to sort of explain and tell people what it is to edit. So you can find out more about that at comixplex.com, and it starts soon, and there's still a few seats left.
What made you decide to teach?
What made me decide to teach? I guess. Yeah.
What inspired you to share your knowledge? That's what my teacher friends call it now.
Okay. Well, years ago, I had a teacher in high school, and somebody asked him if he was teaching to avoid the draft, and we had one of those open rap sessions during the Vietnam War, and his response was, "I feel this is the way I can best serve my country," is what he said. But I've been teaching off and on for about 15 years now, and it sort of overlaps into a lot of the convention and panel work I do. I did a count. I think over the past 10 or 15 years, I've probably done about 1,000 panels. Essentially, those 4 years I was working barnstorming with the Wizard World convention chain, doing 6 to 15 panels at any given show. So it's this combination of practical and idealistic. I have this body of knowledge. I have this Rolodex. I know many, many, many people in the business. I'm on speaking terms with most of them. So, so I just felt like, yes, I have this body of knowledge. I have this series of contacts. I have this, what I think is a unique but practical point of view. So I want to pass the knowledge along. And it's a way to it's part of sort of the mosaic of being a freelancer. Is it's one of those things that you can do. And I found I enjoyed teaching. You will have the occasional crazy student, and you go, why did I think this was a good idea? But usually, most students and most people who come to convention panels or museum panels want you to succeed. So it's and I found I had more of a flair for it than I ever thought. So I enjoy teaching. I enjoy passing along knowledge. I enjoy helping people develop their skills. When you have this kind of oddball career that most people in comics have, just by definition, the minute you say, the minute you hand in that job application, at Marvel Comics, you may not know it, but you're in for an oddball career,
And it's so true. Everybody I know in comics, it's a windy kind of, curvy sort of, oh, here, we're going to go off on this tangent for 3 years and write this weird thing. And then we're going to come back and do Superman.
Well, especially you may think, well, I'm applying for a job as an editor, and it's a job that technically is 9 to 5 and has medical benefits. It's almost like what a regular person would do, but it turns out that that's just an illusion,
Yeah, absolutely. So, excuse me. I felt it coming and tried to stop it. So let's talk about the lengthiness of careers, in that you have a story coming out that you wrote years ago, but it's being released this week.
You are incorrect.
Oh, it's a new story? I thought I read that it was an previously unpublished.
It is set in the era when Darkhawk first came out.
Okay.
But it is new.
Well, then I'm going to yell at whoever writes solicitation copy.
Ah. Okay. Does it?
But
it's. I'm sorry.
Go ahead and tell me about it. Tell me about the story that's coming out this week from in Darkhawk, Heart of the Hawk.
Darkhawk, which to give credit where credit was due or is due, was created by Tom DeFalco and Mike Manley. Tom provided I think a 4-page typed outline. But I was the character who wrote every issue of the 50 issues that came out and the annuals that came out in the 90s. And I added and fleshed out a lot to Tom's initial proposal or mini Bible, whatever you want to call it. So I'm very associated with the character. The character was very popular, certainly for the first few years it was out in the 90s. And I think he's been in other stories over the years. And I get the series. I think Mike Manley, who's the original artist, and I were chatting probably on Facebook Instant Messenger, as we do occasionally, and talking about how John Byrne seems to be doing X-Men stories on his website, but they're not the stories he's not selling to Marvel and doesn't want published. And we talked about doing something like that. And so I said, all right, let's try something like that, and who knows, maybe Marvel would even want to buy it if we did it. So I came up with an outline. Mike liked it. And again, I'm probably getting some details wrong, but one way or another, we pitched the idea to Marvel, and they said, why, funny you should mention that. We're doing a 30th anniversary Darkhawk special. Would you guys like to do a 15-page story for it? So I took a story. I took our story and set it somewhere, probably, if you're a Darkhawk fanatic or not, somewhere between issues 8 and 9 of the original series. But we didn't want to say it was taking place like in 1992, so we left the time frame vague as we could, and the settings are New York settings. There's a big battle scene that takes place in Lincoln Center in Manhattan. So but it's clearly, taking place in early Darkhawk years. But it was a story that Mike and I came up with just this past summer or fall, and then Marvel greenlit it, and yeah, it is brand new.
Ironically, I'm looking now, so just because I'm going to edit that part out and I'll edit this out. Marvel's solicitation copy is different than the solicitation copy on several other websites, which says unpublished. Marvel says an untold story.
Okay. Yeah.
So
untold.
There you go. Somebody mistransposed something.
By definition, unpublished. No, it's although again, since we're strongly implying it takes place, in some vague part of the 90s, any topical references that I used in the script or that show up in the background are things that would have that at least our plan is for it to have made sense if it was published, if only because if in my 30s it was a little bit of a stretch for me to be writing a teenage character. Well, 30 years later, you can do the math on my age if you want. But 30 years later, it was even more of a stretch to try to imagine, even though I have teenage children, yes, I am too old to have teenage children, but even though I have teenage children, I didn't want to pretend, I didn't want to try to write, with it slang. So I tried to avoid, but there is, for those Danny Fingeroth completists, and I know you're out there, there's even a reference to the Dazzler in the story. So.
What's it like having a character that's had staying power for 30 years? I mean, Marvel doesn't do a 30-year anniversary for just everybody.
I think there was, Darkhawk came out in 91, obviously, since the 30th anniversary. So so you could say, well, the comic did well because that was the height of the 90s boom, and people were buying multiple copies of everything. But I think based on the mail and based on the longevity of the character, I think beyond whatever collectability it might have had, people really liked the character. It was, it's among the things that Marvel does best. One of the things I did back in the 90s was a miniseries called Spider-Man Friends and Enemies, and it had Spider-Man, Darkhawk, Nova, and Speedball. So I did it had Spider-Man for the 60s, Spider-Man for the 70s, Spider-Man for the 80s, and Spider-Man for the 90s. So I mean, I think there's always an interest for readers of all ages in the story of a teenager who has power and responsibility thrust on him or her. So I guess the riff we did on that with Darkhawk appealed to a lot of people. Mike's art was great. I mean, I hope my stories were decent, but Mike's art was always terrific, and it gave the character a great look and feel. So I guess that must have hit enough people in some very special place in their psyches and their emotions, that that there's an interest retained in the character.
So we've got just a few minutes left, and I want to ask you about one more thing specifically. But before we do that, tell people where they can find you on the web and social media and that kind of thing. Okay. So they like this Comixplex thing and whatever else you're doing in the future, so they know where you're at.
When you when you said that, I was tempted to quote one of my favorite lines of Tom DeFalco when somebody asks him a question like that, which is, "Indicted is not the same as convicted."
Big Julie from Guys and Dolls. 32 arrests, no convictions.
People can find me. I say my main social media is Facebook. I'm also on Twitter, and I have the very imaginatively titled website DannyFingeroth.com, which is, which needs an updating, but you can certainly get a hold of me through there, or Danny at DannyFingeroth.com. So those would be the main ways to get hold of me.
So you mentioned it earlier, but tell me about your work with the Eisners and Eisner Week.
Well, Will Eisner, as most of your viewers know, but for the few that don't, was one of the pioneers of comics in at least two eras. He did something called The Spirit in the 1940s and 50s, which was a comic insert in Sunday newspapers. It reached millions of readers. It never had the high profile of Superman or Batman, but it was very popular and very sophisticated and revolutionary in its artwork and its use of angles and shading and visual storytelling, and the sophistication of its stories. And he had a lot of very people who went on to great things working with and for him: Jack Cole and Jules Pfeiffer and Lou Fine and actually even Jack Kirby and Al Jaffe worked for him at various times. So that went to the early 50s. Then Eisner got into more educational and instructional kind of comics. And then in 1978, he put out what's considered the first graphic novel, although Will never claim that, but it's sort of for shorthand history. Certainly the first high profile thing that was called a graphic novel, A Contract with God. And Will spent the next 25 years till he died in 2005 pretty much putting out a new graphic novel every year, and really making Mouse possible, making Fun Home possible. Anything that's a graphic novel or a comic that edges more towards literature and not superheroes, and comics with the potential to be art with a capital A, comes from Will Eisner, who practiced what he preached, put out a graphic novel a year. The Contract with God, To the Heart of the Storm, A Life Force. Just go to WillEisner.com. So every year, we have something called Will Eisner Week, which is to spread the word about Will Eisner and his work and his legacy, and about graphic novels in general. And I was doing an Eisner event, a couple of different Eisner events in New York, and the Eisner family hired me to run on the chair of Will Eisner Week. I'm not the table, I'm not the cabaret, I'm not the coffee stand, I'm the chair of Will Eisner Week. And that means my job it largely consists of calling and emailing people and nagging them till they agree to do an event celebrating Will Eisner in the first week in March. Will's birthday, Will was born in March 6th of 1917. So we've grown it from like one or two events in the New York area to over 100 events worldwide, even during the COVID, which blew my mind. We did that. And this year, for the first time, usually we say to people, do some event, in your library, bookstore, classroom, museum, about graphic novels. This year we asked people to do that, but we realized with the COVID they couldn't, so we provided a lot of material, which you can find at WillEisner.com, and it's on YouTube. There's 7 or 8 videos we did, which are still there, and I hope people look at them to tell them about Will Eisner. I have great people like Todd McFarlane and Gene Yang and Jerry Kraft and Dennis Kitchen, and again, other people I'm totally blanking on, talking about Will and different aspects of him and his legacy. So if you'd like to check that out, and if you want to do something for Will Eisner Week 2022, we hope, the website will tell you all about how to do that, WillEisner.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Head over to DeanieFingeroth.com. You can get all the information there. And in stores this week, you have Darkhawk, Heart of the Hawk #1, with stories by Deanie and Tom DeFalco and Dan Abnett and Kyle Higgins and all kinds of people.
Okay, Tom is not in there, but his name is probably in there as the co-creator of the character. But Mike Manley art, of course. Anyway,
It's Tom and Mike are on one line, so it's you know.
I've been there. I get it. All right, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks everybody. Stay well.
We know this has been a difficult time for you. We know you are scared. Here at Regenerist Tech we have developed a safe and effective solution to our worldwide problem. Trust Regenerist. We give you back your life.